Celtics. Championship. Games. Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers. Highlights. 21 games Luma banning championship games on Boston Celtics. Winner 1957 Boston Celtics vs St. Louis Hawks 1958 St. Louis Hawks vs Boston Celtics 1959 Boston Celtics vs Minneapolis Lakers 1960 Boston Celtics vs St. Louis Hawks 1961 Boston Celtics vs St. Louis Hawks 1962 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers 1963 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers 1964 Boston Celtics vs San Francisco Warriors 1965 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers 1966 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers. Winner 1968 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers 1969 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers 1974 Boston Celtics vs Milwaukee Bucks 1976 Boston Celtics vs Phoenix Suns 1981 Boston Celtics vs Houston Rockets 1984 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers 1985 Los Angeles Lakers vs Boston Celtics 1986 Boston Celtics vs Houston Rockets 1987 Los Angeles Lakers vs Boston Celtics 2008 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers. 17 Naito I Panalo at 4 Ong Talo. 4 teams not to malo, 1958 St. Louis Hawks 1985 Los Angeles Lakers 1987 Los Angeles Lakers 2010 Los Angeles Lakers. Boston Celtics on May Pinakamahabang Panalo sa NBA Finals, Walong Sunod na Panalo. 1. 1959 Boston Celtics vs Minneapolis Lakers 2. 1960 Boston Celtics vs St. Louis Hawks 3. 1961 Boston Celtics vs St. Louis Hawks 4. 1962 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers 5. 1963 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers 6. 1964 Boston Celtics vs San Francisco Warriors 7. 1965 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers 8. 1966 Boston Celtics vs Los Angeles Lakers.